Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Segmenting Your Way to Smarter Sending, presented by SparkPost in partnership with Engage. I'm Julie Bishop, and I will be your moderator. In today's webinar, we'll discuss the value of email segmentation and how it can be used to effectively engage with your users, improve deliverability, and optimize internal operations. Before we get started, there's just a few housekeeping items we'd like to cover. We'll be taking questions in both the GoToWebinar chat box and on Twitter, where you can use the hashtag emailpros to join the conversation there. Today, we're joined by two great speakers. First, we have Brian Adamson, Senior Product Manager at SparkPost. Brian is a product management and marketing technology expert who specializes in email and social media marketing SaaS applications. He previously had roles as a product management director at SendGrid, where he launched marketing campaigns, and prior to that, he was at Vertical Response, where he developed email and social media campaign creation tools. He is joined by Noam Rotem, Head of Professional Services and Product Consulting at Engage. Noam has been at Engage from its inception, where he has served in a variety of roles from Senior Product Manager, Marketing Manager, and Head of Support and Professional Services. Currently, Noam heads Engage's product consulting and professional services to provide strategic MarTech and product solutions, as well as consulting to existing and onboarding clients. The topics that will be discussed in today's webinar include the benefits of segmentation relative to email, deliverability, and reputation, how to segment with operational efficiencies, how a leading travel search engine company achieves smarter sending practices through segmentation, and key takeaways and best practices for segmentation. Then we'll leave time for questions at the end. And now I'll turn it over to Brian.
Thanks, Julie. Hi, I'm Brian. Whenever I think about segmentation, I'm reminded of my early days in the email business when I worked at Vertical Response and helped small businesses create and send marketing emails. Some of my customers just wanted to send a blast out. They wanted to do the batch and blast sort of thing. And they thought that if they did that, they'd get, it'd be easy, they'd get great, sort of response. And one problem that they would have is maybe the list they're sending to wasn't necessarily a list of their subscribers. So though they're expecting to get good results, they often didn't, and they get mad when they didn't. So I worked at helping them understand the value of having more targeted lists to improve their campaign performance. So today, years later, while it might seem obvious about the benefits of segmentation relative to email and deliverability and reputation, I think it bears repeating because it is so critical to inbox placement and also to this conversation. So let me take you through this segmentation refresher, and let's start with the definition. So segmentation is simply the sorting of your subscribers or recipients into smaller groups or sets based on an attribute or characteristic. This is done because typically segmentation is used as a personalization tactic. By being customized to the recipient, the email is more relevant and more likely to be read, of course. So attributes are used, for example, to target recipients based on things such as their geographic location, their gender, interests, purchase history, and so on. Of course, this allows the marketer to cater specifically to each different email segment or list, and that list's independent interests rather than creating one mass message for all. So in other words, what's recommended is the exact opposite of what some of my early batch and blast customers wanted to do. And some of the responses that they get, well, it improves with segmentation. Let's go to the next slide. So segmentation provides a ton of value. By segmenting your email, you're targeting recipients and making your message more personal for them. So it becomes more relevant and people are more likely to be interested in your message and therefore more likely to engage with your message. Engagement is critical. Engagement is an indicator to ISPs about the quality of your email, which increases your sender reputation and improves your inbox placement. Internal internet service providers evaluate how your recipients interact with your email when deciding where your email will be placed. If most of your users are unengaged, the ISP probably doesn't think your email is very important and may deliver it to the spam folder. Segmentation is a big deal. According to the Digital Marketing Association, 77% of marketing ROI comes from segmented, targeted, and triggered campaigns. So in this chart, return path research shows the link between sender reputation and marketing success. So, oh, can you go back, please? Yeah, there we go. Senders scoring between 91 to 100, which is the best possible reputation score, saw 92% of their messages delivered to the inbox. This figure drops to 72% for senders scoring between 81 to 90, and 45% for senders scoring 71 to 80. For senders scoring 70 or below, only a small fraction of messages were actually delivered. So this shows that putting in the effort to segment, to become relevant, to have engagement, pays off with a good sender reputation and inbox placement. Okay, now let's move on. To further illustrate how effective segmentation is, let's look at this research from MailChimp. They sampled 2,000 users who sent 11,000 segmented campaigns to 9 million people. Then they compared the results to those users' non-segmented campaigns. So check out these results. So that key engagement metrics, opens, unique opens, and clicks all show some growth. Whereas when you look at bounces, abuse reports, and unsubs, you see that there's a decline, which is good. So you might have been expecting an increase in opens and clicks, but the decrease in bounces and abuse reporting might be surprising. So what's happening is essentially segmentation is resulting in improved email quality. So that's another benefit you get from it. Next slide. So while what I've said so far applies to marketing or promotional email, this also applies to transactional emails. Transactional emails are the types of emails that are triggered based on a user interaction with a web app. These types of emails are highly relevant because they are directly related to something the user did or is doing, and so that context already exists in the user's mind. This slide shows some typical types of transactional emails. While the red lines indicate account-related activities, the blue lines indicate opportunities to leverage transactional emails in other ways. For example, like having a good, compelling welcome message on the activation email and product updates designed to build deeper engagement with the customer. Next slide. To illustrate how impactful transactional or triggered emails can be, you can see from this bar chart that transactional email has very high engagement rates as compared to bulk mailings. So that's just a pretty cut and dry difference there. Next slide. So the benefits of high engagement are increased acceptance rates, and ISPs allow your message to the inbox, decreased spam filtering because your emails are relevant and engaging, better IP reputation, which helps keep you from being blacklisted, sent to spam, and helps you mitigate delivery problems should they come up. And if you're warming up IPs, your IP warm-up will be smoother because you have proven engaged recipients. So the point again is that the more relevant, the more engagement, then better sending reputation, then better quality, and better inbox placement, all as a sort of a value chain. And that's the overview of the benefits of segmentation relative to email and deliverability and reputation. Now I'll hand off to Noam, who's our partner with Engage, and he'll take it to the next level and talk about practical ways to bring this all together. Noam.
Thank you, Brian. Hi, everyone. I'm Noam. I'm head of professional services and product consulting here at Engage. And I'm just going to quickly recap before I jump into the practical. So I was looking for a quote to open this topic of value of segmenting, and I stumbled across this one, and it goes like this. We are all, each and every one, unique in the universe. And that uniqueness is what makes us valuable. So there are a few things I really like about this quote, in particular, the words uniqueness and value. Not just are each of your subscribers unique, there's a unique set of attributes that define their segment. And by targeting and addressing those unique attributes, you bring value to your customers, which creates value for the marketeer. And when I speak about this with our customers, I kind of say like segmentation is the art and science of addressing customers based on their individual preferences in an efficient manner. Efficiency is also an important component. So let's quickly recap the values, and then we're going to jump into afterwards the practical. So the values. When you segment your customer database, it enables you to send them relevant content to each recipient. By doing that, your subscribers are going to engage with your email. That's going to increase your brand reputation as your subscribers grow to know that you send them relevant content. And that content is based on their personal preferences. That in turn is going to increase your sender reputation. That's your sending domain and brand. As mailbox providers of the world, whether they're Yahoo, AOL, Outlook, and in particular, Gmail, they're looking very closely how their users are engaging with your sending domain and with your brand. And when they see good engagement, that's going to increase the amount of messages they're going to let come in, and that's going to increase your reputation of the sending domain, which will increase your inbox placement and your IP reputation. So all of this is essentially a virtuous cycle. Let me just mention quickly the opposite of that. If you don't segment, rather, if you segment those who are unengaged, you're going to have the opposite. By not excluding unengaged, it will result in a negative opposite of all of these above. And it will create a vicious cycle of degrading engagement and a degradation in your reputation, whether that's your sending domain reputation, your IP, and your brand. Next slide, please. So now let's get to the practical. Now that we understand the value, so how do we practically go about segmenting the database? And where do we collect the data points? So segments are basically based on data points. And one of the most common places in email marketing to collect data about your users is via a preference center. And that is one of the best interaction points you can have with your subscribers. Whether it's basic demographic information, like other channels to communicate with them, and most importantly, their areas of interest. So for demographic data, points like location, age, gender are among the most common ones for email marketing. Obviously, every marketeer is going to need to choose what's most relevant for him, but it is important not to overload the forms. In the marketing, you have other data points, typically known as psychographics and AIO. But in email marketing, much more common and practical is AOI, areas of interest, which can be gathered from the preference center as well as behavioral data. So for example, if you're marketing vacation travel, you'll want to know your user's preference as far as budget, location, type of vacations they like cruises, museums, theater, beaches, in order to send them relevant content to meet their interests and needs. So those are your data points, but there are other types of data points, and those are called behavioral. And you have two types. One type is the email behavioral. Those are obviously the opens and clicks that are directly within the email stream. And they tell you a lot about the engagement of your users. They can also tell you about their interest to what links they clicked on. They also enable you to automatically exclude your unengaged subscribers. Opens and clicks, you can also cross-reference not just on a per campaign basis, but you could cross-reference it by taking a look at how different users interact with different types of campaigns, whether one might prefer a weekly one or another one might prefer weekend mailings and another one seasonal mailings. So there's a wealth of information you could get from the email behavioral. There's yet another set of behavioral data, and that might be coming from your website or from your data warehouse, both online and offline. So for example, you could have information from your website about last login. You could have that information from your web app. You could have information from your data warehouse and CRM of whether a certain customer is paying or not paying, registered or not paying, the products they viewed. You can get from accounting their purchase information, their purchase history, how much money they've purchased. So all of these create a wealth of information for you to create highly relevant segments. Next slide, please. So the goal from all of this data is to have high resolution segments. As we spoke about locations, areas of interest, points in your sales funnel in order to send relevant content. And what's another thing that you really need? You need those data points to be up to date, because you don't want to be sending messages like, please register, to already registered customers. And how do we achieve that? So one prerequisite is dynamic segments. And by dynamic segments, I mean rule-based segmentation. Instead of having a static list of emails and customers that you upload and send to each time, you want segments that are based on rules. And here are two examples. The first one is one that would be typical of a sales funnel. Let's say you set up some triggered emails to go out to all those users who had registered in the last 7 days but are not yet paying. That's the rule of the segment. So you send out messages sending them all the benefits of why they want to become paying users. Some of them will actually become paying. Once they do, their data point for not paying will change to paying, and they'll automatically fall out of that segment and stop getting that sequence of emails. Another example might be a last login. Let's say you're running a website where people typically log in on a daily basis or certainly a weekly basis, and then you set up a segment that says everyone who has not logged in the last 30 days, you're going to say, hey, we haven't seen you in a while. Here are all the new updates that you might be interested in. Some of those users are going to engage, log in. That rule is going to, the last login is going to change to today. They're going to fall out of that segment and stop getting that sequence. So that's one set of efficiencies, is your dynamic segments. Another efficiency is back-end data integration. And that integration can come from two primary places. One would be your website. We already spoke about the preference center, which has the demographic information and the areas of interest. Other information, as we just spoke about, could be last login. It could be items in a shopping cart. And another set of informations could be post-email activity, which can be tracked automatically through conversion points. So let's say you have a webinar campaign. People click, land, and register. And you have a conversion pixel on the post-registration page, which is automatically transmitted back into your email marketing platform. That way you could send reminders to everyone who registered, or you could try to ask everyone who has opened and clicked to come on and register because they haven't registered yet. So it's so important to get that information from your website into your segments so you could have relevant, up-to-date segments. Now, bigger operations typically have customer relation management systems and data warehouse, where there will be another wealth of set of information. For example, purchase history, accounting data, customers who have purchased maybe certain amounts of values in the last recent time. You could give special discount to VIP customers. Other information might be from online surveys, or it could even be offline information, like from brick and mortar stores, where you have purchase data history as well as in-store surveys. So both these elements are key for your segmentation efficiencies. Next slide, please. Okay, so we have all these fine-tuned segments, and they're all signed, sealed, and ready to deliver. But now we're presented with a new challenge, and that is how to create tailored content for each segment. The more segments you have, the more variants of content you need to produce. Producing tens of variations of content for each segment manually is time intensive and simply not scalable when you're talking about hundreds and thousands of variations. So I was looking for a quote about this challenge and appropriately found this Gartner report about this very matter. And it said that in 2020, content will become marketing's biggest bottleneck. So we don't actually need a Gartner report to tell us this. As any marketeer will tell you, we've been living this challenge for the past decade. But more importantly, what's the solution? And the solution is a technology known as dynamic content. And what is dynamic content? So I like to say, this is not your father's Oldsmobile. And by that, I mean, we're not talking about just custom fields and merge tags for personalization like hi Jane or hello John. We're talking about content blocks. So for example, someone looking for a job, travel, real estate on the West Coast will get a different set of content than someone looking for those things on the East Coast. So different subscribers will get different content blocks according to their latest data points and behavioral values. And there are various ways of implementing this. One way is to actually put in if then else logic directly into the body message. So you could have in the same message different content blocks for different users with different data points. That's one level. Another level, you could take it to one step more advanced, is by putting some of that content block directly in the database along with your customer records. So along with his email and along with his first name, you might have a content block that's specific to the segment that he belongs to. One downside of that is that if you have very large database, that means uploading a lot of data all the time. And finally, the most dynamic of them all is content feeds, which allows you to put a feed in your email message, goes out to a content server, and brings back perfectly ready-made content specific for each user based on his data points. And we'll take a look at examples of how to do each of these in the next slide. So let's start with the if-then-else content logic. Let's say this is a newsletter of Broadway Playbill newsletter, and it's sending out news about shows in different cities. So the first expression there could be, if the city is Boston, you'll get a whole set of shows showing in Boston. And the next one could be is, if the city is LA, you'll get a different set of shows showing in LA. So that allows you in one campaign to send out to different content to different users based on their location, which is a great way of efficiency, as you don't have to send out multiple campaigns for each set. The next example that we talked about is storing the dynamic content block within the database itself. So here's an example of a newsletter with meetup information. So it might say something like this: "Hi Jane, here are the details of the sales strategy meeting in the city of Austin." And then it will have all the details of there in a content block about the meetup in Austin. As we said, this makes it very simple, makes it very dynamic. Every user that's part of a different segment is going to get the information that's relevant to him. But there is a downside in that you have to update all of that data, upload it directly into the list database of all your contacts. And then the most dynamic of them, as we spoke, is the content feeds. And there are a variety of different content feeds. There are HTML feeds, there are dynamic HTML feeds, there are XML feeds, and there are RSS feeds. And what I want to mention about the dynamic HTML feed, because it's extremely powerful as far as its efficiency, is that you could add, this is true with the other feeds as well, but you could add parameters to the URL that are specific to each subscriber. So you see here an example of where you have zip code and you have job title. So you could send one campaign that will go out to all of the United States, but everyone with a different job title and a different zip code is going to get a different content block, which makes for a tremendous amount of efficiency, as you don't have to send out different campaigns. Next slide, please. So now that we spoke about the how, let's look at some real-world examples. And these are some actual examples from some of our customers. Julie, slide back. Julie, can you hear me?
Yes. We are on the
Okay, great. So let's look at this example. And it's really made out of two actually fairly basic conditions, but actually are very powerful. One of them is that it automatically excludes all of the unengaged subscribers. So what is the criteria? The criteria is everyone who hasn't opened in the last 45 days. The other criteria of this segment, and this is the actual segment name called US West Coast, is a criteria that says for all those who have a data point called home airport, so each subscriber has a field called home airport, which the airport code that is closest to him based on his location. So everyone who matches San Francisco, LA, San Diego, San Jose is going to get West Coast offering. And here on the right-hand side, we see an example of the actual email that would have been based on that segment. So you could see it's extremely efficient. Two very relevant data points that goes out to engaged users. They get, and based on their location, they get content that's completely relevant to them, all in one campaign. Next slide, please. So now let's take a look at the data side of that and how you could benefit from the efficiencies of data content generation and overcome the challenge of creating many variations of content. So I'm going to start with the example on the right. That's a simpler one using the if then else logic. And this was of a real marketeer who sends out event-based newsletters. And this is one that he sends out to the UK. And as you can see, there's logic there that says, if the city is London, then you have a set of events going on in London. And if the city is Bristol, you'll have a set of events for all those that are in Bristol. So in one campaign, you could send out to a variety of regions. The if then else logic is good for up to a certain amount of variation. I would say rule of thumb would be about 10. But beyond that, you need something that's far more dynamic, but still you have great efficiency here of sending out one campaign with a whole bunch of different content to different users in different locations. Now let's look at this kind of what I call the power play example. And this is from a large travel company with a content server that sends out weekly travel offerings. Instead of a separate campaign for each region, and you can see at the end of the feed there, there's a dynamic URL parameter, which is called region. So based on each subscriber's location, whether that be Northeast or whether that be West Coast, each subscriber group is going to get a different set of content. One will be for the West Coast, one will be for the Northeast, depending on where they are. And this provides them for tremendous amount of efficiencies as they're only sending out one campaign, different regions getting different blocks of content. I do want to give an example that's even using this very technology with another client that we have that's in the job board space. One that we looked at a little while before in one of the examples. So they send out huge campaigns. On the URL, they have their two basic parameters. One is the zip code and the other is the job title. And that goes out to hundreds of cities around the USA, each one getting a different content block based on those subscribers' personal preferences, which is a tremendous amount of efficiency. I will also say that that same client also uses another feature that we have, and that's to send by time zone. So they could set up one campaign that goes out at 8 a.m. and it will go out at 8 a.m. in the East Coast and 8 a.m. in Central Time, Mountain Time, and the West Coast. So it's really, all of these provide for tremendous amount of efficiency for being able to target multiple segments that are highly relevant with targeted content. Next slide, please. So let me sum up. So here are the main things that you want to do. You want to target your engaged users. You want to automatically exclude your unengaged users for all the reasons we spoke about with rule-based segmenting. You want to use dynamic segments so you can efficiently have users flow in and out of segments based on their personal data points and behavior. You want to automate updating your data points from your backend integration, from website or for your CRM. You want to have tailored content for each of your tailored segments. And you want to automate content generation to overcome the content bottleneck in order to create many variations of content for each of your segments. Brian, over to you.
Thanks. And just jumping way out to the big picture again from what we talked about at the beginning, just remember the importance of to get good inbox placement. Segmentation has to equal relevance, engagement, reputation, and then you get a high center score, and that'll be good inbox placement. So just always remember that, go back to that. And that transactional emails are extremely relevant to customers and will have high engagement, which makes them a valuable opportunity for communication. So be sure to leverage transactional emails to create further engagement with customers. So along with your activation email, use that and have a compelling welcome email message on that. Have onboarding emails to help new customers get started and learn about your product. There's opportunities to communicate there as well. And stay engaged with your customers with reward emails, for example, for their use of your product. And don't forget to include referral reward offers, even on receipt emails that you send. And that's it, I think. Over to you, Julie.
Thanks, everyone. Now we have time for a few questions. As a reminder, you can either post them in the GoToWebinar chat, or you can reach out to us on Twitter and use the hashtag emailpros. And it looks like the first question is, what time frame depicts a user who is engaged versus unengaged?
I'll take that one. So I think it depends. Your audience may be only expecting emails in some sort of seasonal cycle with intervals of time or weeks or months. And other verticals or industries may expect much more frequent emails. So it kind of depends. But generally, the way we're looking at it from SparkPost was around 6 months would be a good rule of thumb. So if recipients haven't opened or clicked on emails from you within the last 6 months, then their lack of engagement will start to negatively impact your sender reputation. So one strategy is to preserve your sender reputation by removing those unengaged from your list. And I'll do a little soft plug here to do this. SparkPost has a new feature called Smart Send that automatically stops sending messages to these least engaged recipients. At least 6 months of data is needed for this to work, obviously, because of that time frame. And this is available as an API now and is in beta, so you can check that out at our website.
So let me weigh in on that as well. And let me say that it also really depends on the vertical and the nature of your frequency. So let's say, for example, you're running a charity newsletter and fundraising may only occur a few times a year, and users might only be engaged at the yearly end of year drive. So someone who hasn't opened in the last few months may still be a very engaged user because he's going to engage at your yearly fundraise. On the other hand, you might be sending out updates about news, weather, sports on a daily basis. And in that case, if someone hasn't opened in 30, 45, 60 days, then that's definitely a sign that they've lost or losing interest, and you need to approach them in some other matter. What I will say is that with rule-based segmentation, you can easily make the rules to include the target and target anyone who is engaged, and automatically exclude everyone who isn't engaged, whatever that time frame is most appropriate for you. Julie?
Okay, great, thanks. Looks like the next question is, how much profiling do I need to set up with my subscribers to achieve the best segmentation strategy?
So I'll take that. So we spoke about various types of automation, and some of those automations may not be immediately available when you're starting your operation and may take some time till you ramp up. So you want to start off small and you want to keep it simple, but you also want to be relevant. So you're going to need to choose what are the most relevant data points and behavioral you want to look at and start from there. And as you start building in more automation from your website, from your data warehouse into your segments and automate the generation of content, you'll be able to then scale and create more fine-tuned segments and content, as you won't need to do that manually. And in general, in technology, I very much like the iterative approach of building a building one floor at a time, and that would be my approach. Julie?
Okay, great. The next question is, if subscribers are in multiple segments, are there best practices for how often you email them?
So I'll take take that first. So rule-based segmenting, which we've been speaking about, enables marketeers to easily control that. So for example, a rule could be only target users that were not sent an email in the past 2 days. So if you're sending out a daily campaign, with that rule in place, you can limit frequency to every third day on a per user basis. And in that way, you kind of put in a built-in stopper that prevents over-targeting. Of course, also from your preference center, you could get information from your users and ask them how frequently you want to get emails, and you could segment based on that as well. Brian?
Yeah, I think you've covered it pretty well. I mean, in general, you don't want to over email, touch your recipients too much. And what you do, I think, as you pointed out, it depends on your business, how engaged your audience tends to be, and you need to know your audience, need to understand sort of what their expectations are around engagement, and don't overdo it. But again, I think being able, and then experimentation, like what Noam was saying about sort of having an iterative approach, is really critical here as well. Is to see, based on the segment that someone is in, what really resonates with them, what offer or not, and then maybe carefully track what the performance was there, and then try something else. So for example, if you had someone in a segment and they made a purchase, you don't want to, again, reach out to them for another purchase. Maybe there's a post-purchase offer or something that's more appropriate to them, that kind of a thing. So that's a couple of more things that you can do in that case.
Okay, great. The next question is, if users become unengaged, what are the best practices for re-engagement?
So, I'll jump in first, I guess. I think some of the best practices for reaching out, I mean, if they're not engaged and you don't want to hurt your sender score, then there's other options we have these days. There's so many options. One thing you might want to do is try a re-engagement campaign via email. However, you run the risk of hurting your reputation depending on the exact makeup of the recipients you're sending to. But then there's also non-email things you can do, of course, like via social media. And that's what we were doing way back in the day at Vertical Response, was having these other channels to reach out to your customer base. So via Facebook or something like that, via website promotion. So if you suspect that the same customers still visit your website, you could offer promotions or win back sort of offers on your website, and other advertising channels. I think you'd be very creative. One of the things that I'd offered as a product in the past was a postcard product, so that if someone was unsubscribed from email marketing, and spam compliance laws requires us not to email them anymore, then if we had their address, their good old-fashioned physical street address, you could potentially send a postcard to those person to try to engage them. So that's another sort of creative way to go about trying to do that. Noam, what do you think?
Yeah, so you pretty much covered it all. Let me just recap it briefly in my own words. So, right, ideally you want to reach out to them in other channels like social media, in the app of their phone, through messaging on the website, and advertise on any of those properties and provide compelling incentives and benefits for them to re-engage with your emails. And that could even be like, offline, like in-store as well.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't have any other channel to communicate with them, so you gave all the prescriptions about that, and as you correctly mentioned, there's a whole methodology called re-engagement campaigns, which is a topic for another webinar. I will just say, just on that note, that Engage recently launched a new product for engaging unengaged contact called Engage Audience, and anyone who's interested, you can contact us for more details about that. And that's it from my side.
Thanks, guys. That looks like all the questions we have for today. If you would like more information about how segmentation will impact your business and email, you may visit the links you see here on the page for SparkPost and Engage. All registrants will receive a copy of the slides via email, as well as a link to the recorded webcast within 24 hours. Thank you again to our speakers, and thank you to everyone for joining us.